let's not waste any more time. We're going to start with Chaos Strike in Demon Hunter. Chaos Strike is obviously a basic card for Demon Hunter. Just gives your hero +2 attack and you draw a card. I think it's actually a totally reasonable card that I could see putting into decks. You look at like Heroic Strike, which actually sees play in some aggressive warrior decks. Obviously, the mana per damage is lower, so you're getting less burst damage out of it. But if you're looking to use things that trigger off of your hero attacking, if you're looking to cycle through your deck and find specific cards, like compare this to say a Novice Engineer, right? Which you'd rather have, +2 attack or drawing a card. Or rather, let me start that part over. Compare this to, say, a Novice Engineer, which you'd rather have, +2 attack or a 1/1 body. Often you're actually just going to want the +2 attack to be able to either deal the damage immediately or to clear off a minion. So I think it's actually a perfectly serviceable card. And I think that's a theme we're going to see quite a bit in Demon Hunter. I think the average power level of Demon Hunter cards is not necessarily higher than other classes, but I'd say there's fewer bad cards, right? Because Demon Hunter has fewer cards in general, they have less room to have cards that are overall really weak. And I think that we're going to see most of their cards are going to be serviceable somewhere, and I think Chaos Strike is among them. Sound like Shir just like fell down the stairs. But he was just walking. Alright. Next up we have Coordinated Strike. 3-cost spell, summon 3 1/1 Illidari with Rush. Pretty straightforward card. Can be relatively effective. If you look at this compared to, say, like Bees, right? Bees in Druid does something pretty similar to this, except it summons one more thing, but the things have to attack all the same minion. And there's no time in between to do anything that possibly increases their attack. Coordinated Strike obviously works well with some of the other cards that Demon Hunter have that key off of minions dying. And is totally reasonable removal effect, especially if you combine it with anything like a Knife Juggler or a Direwolf Alpha or something like that can increase the power of the Illidari. So I think this is, again, pretty serviceable card. I don't think this is an all-star by any means, but I think this can be very much a sort of bread and butter style card for any kind of Demon Hunter deck that's looking to go with sort of the soul magic plan that cares about its minions dying. Next up we have Shadowhoof Slayer, a 1-cost 2/1 with Battlecry. Give your hero +1 attack this turn. This card is kind of interesting because obviously anything that allows you to develop on the board and have some amount of tempo is reasonably valuable. It's kind of like an Elven Archer, except it's a 2/1 instead of a 1/1, which is a pretty big deal. That said, 1 health minions in a world where Demon Hunter is likely to be very popular, both because of the ability for Demon Hunter to just attack and kill them for 1 mana. Like, 1 health minions were already fairly weak in a lot of matchups, simply because they died to 2-cost hero powers. The fact that they die to 1-cost hero powers against Demon Hunter is kind of problematic. The fact that there's, if the Illidari, like little Russian guys, are popular, having these small 1 health minions are kind of problematic as well. It can be, effectively a 2-cost that you play with your hero power on turn 2 to do 2 to something, and that's actually probably more of an appealing use of this than anything else. But I do think that it's just important to keep in mind the danger of very fragile minions has increased with the popularity of Demon Hunter, so you need to have that sort of frame of reference when you're evaluating especially cheap minions with only a single point of health. Next up we have Chaos Nova. This card is fantastic. If you compare this to Hellfire, you compare this to Flame Strike, those are cards that have seen play and continue to see play in their respective classes that are similar and in many ways less powerful than this. This is an incredibly powerful board clear for 5 mana, and crucially, it's also board clear in a class that can easily attack and finish off minions that manage to survive it. So if you're looking to play a Demon Hunter deck that is focused on board control, looking to get to the late game, this is going to be a staple forever. It's a basic card, not even a classic card. So every single Demon Hunter player, will have this and have access to it. And just super, super powerful, absolute all-star card that's very likely to carry any kind of Demon Hunter control deck. I just fed him. Shiro's like, vengeance! Vengeance! What are you even barking about now? He stopped. Next up, we have Sightless Watcher, a 2-cost 3/2 demon with Battlecry. Look at 3 cards in your deck, choose one to put on top. This is a super interesting card, and definitely a card that I feel like has been misevaluated by a lot of people. I saw some people talk about this and comparing it to like an actual card draw effect, right? They're like, oh, well, would you rather draw a card or have and have like a little bit bigger minion, or like be able to control the top card of your deck and have a smaller minion or bigger minion. You know what I mean? Let me start that part over. Shiro's just staring at me now. Let me try this again. Sightless Watcher, a 2-cost 3/2 for 2. Battlecry, look at 3 cards in your deck, choose one to put on top. This is a card that I feel like has been really misevaluated from some of the takes that I've seen about it recently. People talk about how they'd rather have like a loot hoarder and get a card right away. This is, I think, a very important card for any kind of deck that relies on specific synergies, finding particular cards. Obviously, you can't find a specific card, but if you're looking for a specific type of card, whether like a threat to fill out your curve or some sort of reactive card to keep you alive, this can find either of those. And I feel like, given that it is a 3/2 for 2, you're much more likely to be playing this in a deck that cares about curving out, because, well, you're spending 2 mana to play something in the early turns that isn't actually recouping you that card back. So you have to care about the 3/2. So I feel like this is more likely to be played in an aggressive deck that is looking to actually get certain synergies together, whether it's like demons with things that buff demons, or demons with the reduced cost things of demons, or just generally fill out your curve. That's where I see this living rather than in a control deck, because a control deck is unlikely to really want to play a 3/2 for 2 in the first place. Next up, we have Seder Overseer, a 3-cost 4/2. After your hero attack, summon a 2/2 Seder. This, I think, is a really powerful looking card to me. Obviously, some of this depends on how valuable getting a 4/2 and a 2/2 is in the early turns of the game, and I would say that seems really, really strong to me. Any kind of tempo matchup, especially if you have like a weapon. Say you play a weapon on turn 2, then you play this on turn 3 and attack. That is super powerful. You just end up getting so much board presence, especially if your weapon is actually killing anything on the opposing side of the board. It just seems extremely powerful in terms of being able to generate a board very, very quickly. And as we know, there are ways for Demon Hunter to take advantage of having small minions dying. So being able to not only generate a board presence to actually pressure your opponent, but also to possibly gain some sort of advantage off of in the sort of middle to late turns can be very, very strong. It's also really important to note that this is so much more powerful in Demon Hunter than it would be in any other class, because you can guarantee the ability to attack for just 1 mana with your 1 mana hero power. So I think this is a extremely strong, especially for a basic card, and I think this is pretty likely to see a significant amount of play. Next up, we have Glaive Bound Adept. This is a 5-cost 7/4 with Battlecry. If your hero attack this turn, deal 4 damage. First of all, it's a 5-cost 7 attack minion. Secondly, it deals 4 damage to anything. It can deal it to your opponent, it can deal it to a minion, it can deal it to your own minion, your own face just for BM when you're crushing your opponent so badly because your Demon Hunter cards are so powerful. This is a really, really, really powerful card. It can be powerful in an aggressive deck to finish your opponent off. It can be powerful in like a mid-range deck to help control the board or finish your opponent off. And it feels like it can even theoretically be pretty powerful in a control deck, as long as you have some sort of weapons that you can use to be able to attack and help control the board, while this helps control the board as well. This just seems like a really, really, really solid card overall, and I would expect this card to see a significant amount of play. I do think that its primary home is likely to be in aggressive versions of Demon Hunter, but I think that if you don't pay attention to the flexibility this has in its ability to actually kill minions as well, you're missing out on some of its power. Carbonation can do this to you. I'm like burping like crazy. Next up we have Inner Demon. 8 cost, give your hero +8 attack this turn. This is, I think, probably not nearly as good as it looks to some people. Some people look at this and they're like, oh my god, it's Pyroblast, right? It costs 8 mana and you're like, it does 8 damage. It's like almost the mana exchange, the similar mana exchange, but almost the amount of damage for a Pyroblast. It's crucial to note that it is a weapon-based attack or a melee-based attack. It has to go through taunts, unlike a Pyroblast, which can just finish the game on any sort of board state. You can theoretically use this with like a lifesteal weapon to gain like a ton of health back, and that can be pretty powerful as well. But this feels like it's just a bit too much mana given what you're actually getting out of it in terms of being able to use it for removal to finish people off. And I don't really expect this to see a ton of play. Chiro's snarking. You all right, buddy? All right. Next up, we have Soul Cleave. 3-cost spell with lifesteal. Deal 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions. I feel like this is a pretty strong card overall. The lifesteal portion of it, I think, is actually quite relevant. A lot of the concern that a weapon-based or attacking-based class that's looking to play any kind of control game can have is its ability to stay alive. One of the big things that sets Demon Hunter apart from Rogue in terms of its ability to actually kill minions with its face is the fact that it has AoE, which can help it when it gets behind on the board, and lifesteal, which can help it when it has attacked so many minions with its face, whether claws, weapons, whatever. And this is both of those. So it is going to depend pretty dramatically on what the metagame looks like. How good is killing two health minions on the third or perhaps later turn. Again, crucially, the fact that this can combine with your hero power or weapons allows you to take out larger minions with it, and the fact that it has lifesteal means that it combines very well with those. So say your opponent has, an SI and something else, being able to Soul Cleave, attack with a weapon and clear off the board and not really take that much damage helps a great deal in those sort of tempo board-based matchups. It's kind of like a multi-shot. A multi-shot's obviously not a very good card in a lot of cases, but the fact that it has the lifesteal means that, and comes down faster, means that it's much better against aggressive decks. Part of what makes, I think, multi-shot poor is the fact that it's a bit slow. You care much more about the early turns than you do sort of the mid turns when you're playing against aggressive matchups. And the fact that you often take that off of, say, a Zephyrus, not necessarily often, but I've taken it more than I would expect off of a Zephyrus. There's certainly a significant number of board states where it can be quite powerful. Where else? What do we have? Speaking of lifesteal, Eldrazi War Blades. These are quietly one of the more impactful, more important of the basic cards for Demon Hunter. The fact that they have lifesteal is, again, really important for any kind of controlling or mid-rangey Demon Hunter style deck to be able to actually use its face to attack minions. Again, very crucially, the fact that this stacks with any kind of attack buff. That includes your hero power. So as long as you're spending 1 mana, that's effectively a 3-power lifesteal weapon. Also combines with stuff like Chaos Strike, or if you're into that, Inner Demon to get big swings of life steal attacking, which goes a long way when you're trying to control the board and clear with your face. Next up, we have Command the Illidari. Talked about this a little bit earlier with the smaller version. I do think that this bigger version is, my guess, going to be less impactful than the smaller version. Maybe this is going to be a foolish estimate, given obviously this is more powerful. You're getting twice as many for not quite twice as many mana, but the impact of having this many minions, this many small minions attacking, I think scales differently at different stages of the game, and also scales with your mana in a weird way, with its ability to combine with other effects. So obviously, the 6 is more powerful than 3, but is having 6 of them for 5 more likely to impact the board in a meaningful way when you can combine the 3-cost spell with, say, Knife Juggler, or with Feast of Souls, which we'll get to in a bit. Overall, I feel like you're obviously probably going to play both of these, and a lot of decks that you play either of them. And this one is going to swing the game more when you hit it, but I feel like the smaller one is more likely to be more important to help control the game early on, whereas this obviously takes a little while to get online, especially when you're combining it with any other sort of effect. Excuse me. Next up, we have Twin Slice, which is 0 cost, give your hero +1 attack, add second slice to your hand, which is also 0 cost, give your hero +1 attack. This, I think, is quietly one of the best Demon Hunter cards. You look at this, and when I first looked at this, I was like, oh, this doesn't seem that great. But then, once I thought about it, it was like, this is backstab, right? This is a backstab you can split up. You can use just one part of it and kill something small, along with your hero power, say. You can use another part of it and kill something else small. You can use both parts at the same time and kill something, straight up. You can use this to trigger any of your things that care about attacking. You can use this in so many ways. The 0 cost card for gadgets and auctioneer. It just does so many things for 0. And I think that people always underestimate the power of anything that costs 0. And this is 2 things that cost 0 that you can split up however you want. You can use it with Kael'thas, right? You can just play Kael'thas into Twin Slice, Second Slice, whatever you want. You can fire off that Inner Demon and hit your opponent for 10. There's just a lot that this can do. It's not technically Twin Spell, which is actually also kind of important, and especially important for Demon Hunter because of Outcast. Outcast carrying up the position of cards in your hand means that if you use your Twin Slice, you don't just have the second slice appear in the same spot as you do with a card like, say, Ray of Frost. It will appear on the far right. So very important thing to keep in mind with Outcast mechanics. But overall, I just think this card is super, super powerful. Going to be extremely flexible in terms of how it impacts a lot of different game states. And I think it'll show up in tons of Demon Hunter decks. Next up, we have Flame Reaper. 7 cost, 4/3 weapon. Also damages the minions next to whomever your hero attacks. This is very similar to Scourgelord Garrosh, the Death Knight for Warrior. It is, in fact, basically exactly that without the changed hero power, because you just get a 4/3 weapon that cleaves. So you pay 1 less mana, you don't get the Whirlwind effect, you don't get the 5 armor, but you do get this. This card doesn't seem like it is likely to be like a staple to me. This feels like it's a card that's very contextual in a metagame. If there are a lot of sort of 4 health minions in a format, and there's a lot of board states that involve multiple minions, then Flame Reaper has the potential to be quite strong. It's sort of like Super Collider, right? Super Collider is a card that, when there's a metagame where there's a lot of similarly sized minions, can be quite powerful. This feels very similar to me. And if you can get some way to give your hero life, so which I don't think there is, the way that you just gain lifesteal in Demon Hunter, though I haven't actually seen all the cards from Ashes of Outland, so I'm just going to stumble across one in this review and look like an idiot. But if you can actually get lifesteal, this obviously can be huge swaths of life that you're gaining immediately. And obviously, even if there isn't something right now, it's something to keep in mind in the future. Once there are additional expansions for Death Knight. So I don't think, like I said, that this is going to be a superstar card, but I think this can definitely be a niche weapon that can see play in particular metagames. Next up, we have Battle Fiend, a 1-cost 2/2 demon. After hero attacks, gain +1 attack. This card I think actually seems very strong. For one, it's a 1-cost 2/2, right? And 1-cost 2/2 is already sort of pretty solid. We see like Blazing Battle Mage see a lot of play, Enchanted Raven saw a lot of play, and then it has upside. Every time your hero attacks, you gain 1 attack. Demon Hunter gets to attack a lot. I feel like this is going to be a staple card in not only aggressive versions of Demon Hunter, but I could even see this being played as a board control tool in sort of mid-range and possibly even controlling versions of Demon Hunter. The latter only really if there's a metagame where you really want early minions to contest your opponent's early minions. Sort of like a Mistress of Mixtures when you saw that played in a lot of other decks. Because not only is this capable of pressuring your opponent, trading with their stuff, it can trade up pretty readily, right? If your opponent doesn't kill this, you play it in turn 1, you start hero powering and attacking each turn. This can suddenly like trade into like their 4-drop. And that's a huge deal. So I think this is a extremely powerful card that'll see play in a lot of different decks. Next up, we have Blade Dance, 2-cost spell. Deal damage equals to your hero's attack to 3 random enemy minions. This is kind of like a Blade Flurry, right? Blade Flurry used to cost 2, and used to deal damage to your opponent's minions and them. You have to, of course, sacrifice your weapon. This obviously is quite strong as a sort of AoE effect. Not great if there's like a full board of stuff, but Demon Hunter, with its ability to attack into small minions, with its hero power, with weapons and such, is relatively capable of like picking apart a board that has like a few small things, and then you get to Blade Dance and kill the other things. So I think this is definitely a pretty strong card. Obviously, this is going to be a sort of metagame dependent card as to how much you actually want this effect. And it's important to note that Blade Dance and Chaos Nova kind of are likely to want to go at least somewhat in different decks. Chaos Nova, if you're looking for ways to just clear off the board because you are looking to get to the late game, is obviously a much more consistent and guaranteed clear than this. But if you are playing kind of a mid-range or aggressive deck in a metagame where there are other, a lot of other decks that have similar sorts of plans of filling the board early, Blade Dance can be a great way for you to sort of push the advantage and be able to clear off their board while maintaining your own, which of course you can't do with Chaos Nova. Next up, we have Wrathscale Naga. It's as I said during the reveal stream, the initial one, it is Soul Juggler come to standard. This is one of the scarier cards with all those Illidari creating cards that make a bunch of rushing minions, because you send those into their death, and, well, then your opponent is sent to their death. It is important to note that this deals 3 damage to a random enemy, so it can hit opposing minions. It can also hit your opponent's face. So that can be a pro and a con, right? Because say you have a bunch of things that you want to attack into your opponent's stuff. If you're trying to like kill your opponent's minions, well, sometimes you're going to want to attack enough of them and be able to actually guarantee to burn them down if it were a random minion. The fact that it's can hit your opponent's face, and if you're trying to kill your opponent, you could also just rush all these small things in and then kill their minions without actually getting enough shots at their face, so you don't actually burn them out. Overall, I think this card feels like it's likely to be quite powerful. It is, of course, very fragile, right? It's a 3/1 for 3. So it's going to be the sort of thing that you hold back and then try and combo in a turn by rushing a bunch of stuff in. And it's going to be something that I think people are going to try to play around very heavily by not allowing Demon Hunters to have big boards that they can at least already have sort of queued up for Wrathscale Naga damage, in addition to the possibility of all those Illidari Rush. But I just think this card seems very, very powerful, and I expect to see quite a bit of play and be one of the cornerstone, like, anchor cards of those Soul Magic Rush decks. Excuse me. Next up we have Zul Horror. 1 cost 2/1 with Death Rattle, add a 2/1 Lost Soul to your hand. This card kind of runs into that same issue that I discussed earlier of, well, it's a 2/1 minion that, in a world where Demon Hunter I expect to be very, very popular, is much weaker than it would be in most other worlds. The fact that it easily dies to a hero power, easily dies to an Illidari. I think this is an okay card, but just doesn't feel like, especially compared to the other Demon Hunter cards that we have seen, it doesn't really feel like it has quite a high enough power level to actually make its way into a lot of these decks. Maybe this is just a card that goes into like an aggressive Demon Hunter deck because you want a certain density of 1-drops. But this is definitely better than sort of most neutral 1-drops that you'd possibly play. Getting additional minions that you can play that are cheap. This gives you effectively two 1s for 1. Obviously not like immediately, and you have to wait for it to die. Can be effective with the things that care about your minions dying. They don't actually have rush compared to the Illidari things, so I don't know. I think it feels okay, but doesn't really feel like a standout to me. I feel like this is going to be sort of a role player and filler in the decks that want it. Oops, I almost changed the wrong thing. Next up, we have Raging Fel Screamer, aka Demon Consort. 4 cost 4/4. The next demon you play costs 2 less. I think this card is really, really good. Dragon Consort in Paladin never ended up being that powerful because the Dragon Paladin archetype didn't really have the proper support to actually get you to those sort of long games. It kind of had it's like, well, if you're going to play Control Paladin with stuff like Equality Project Creation, why are you ramping into these big dragons instead of just playing stuff like Tyrion or whatever, better sort of finishers? Whereas this, you look at the Demon Hunter cards, there already are a ton of things to support playing a controlling like long game deck with stuff like Chaos Nova and everything, and being able to Raging Fel Screamer out any kind of gigantic demon early feels extremely powerful. Stuff like Pit Commander that just starts giving you additional demons. Crucially, this is the next demon you play, period, not the next demon you play this turn. It's also not itself a demon, which is different than It's also not itself a demon, which is different than Dragon Consort. Dragon Consort you could never stack 2 Dragon Consort effects because Dragon Consort affected the next Dragon Consort. You can play Raging Fel Screamer on 4, Raging Fel Screamer on 5, and then in turn 6 play a 10-cost demon because you have both of these effects that end up stacking on one another. So I think this card is extremely powerful. I expect it to be a cornerstone card in the kind of big demon ramp archetype that Demon Hunter seems to have tools for. Next up, we have Feast of Souls. This is a card that I've alluded to quite a few times already. 2-cost spell, draw a card for each friendly minion that died this turn. This I feel like this and Wrathscale Naga feel like the two sort of cornerstone cards of the Soul Magic Illidari Rush archetype. And this in particular, I think, is the more important of the two, even if the Wrathscale Naga is likely to be the card that ends the game. This is the card that gets all the pieces together. Anytime you're playing any kind of combo-based archetype, one of the most important things is drawing cards, because you need to actually get all the pieces of your combo and put them together. Feast of Souls does that, right? And if you have like a sort of mid-game where there's not that much going on, you're like, okay, well, I'll just fire off one of my Command the Illidaris or whatever and draw some cards off Feast of Souls. Even if it isn't actually like a game-winning combination, it digs you deeper to find the possibility of actually assembling that game-winning combination, and that's just extremely powerful. So this can easily be like a draw 5 cards for 2 mana with the right setup, with literally just one other card. And that obviously can be extremely effective, especially when those cards with stuff like Command the Illidari are also helping you remove your opponent's board at the same time. So I expect the card to see a lot of play. Obviously, if the sort of Soul Magic archetype doesn't itself come together, this can see a lot less play. But even just in an aggressive deck that has stuff like the small demons that make other demons, right? Or the Seder Overseer, or the weapon which makes a couple of tokens, which we'll get to shortly, I'm sure. All of these things that make a couple of minions on the board can give you just like a couple of cards drawn with Feast of Souls, and you don't even necessarily have to have these big combo turns to make this card good enough to see play. This is just in the order that they're labeled in the files that were sent to me. That's the order that we're going in. So I think it went from basic cards to initiate cards. I think we're still in initiate cards, and then it goes into the set cards, and I think we're still in initiate cards. Yeah, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more initiate cards, and then we actually get 2 expansion cards, something like that. All right. Next up, we have Nephron Thomas. Next up, we have Nephron Thomas, a 9-cost 8/8 dragon with Battlecry, summon 2 random 0-cost minions. That doesn't seem very powerful. Oh wait, it upgrades each time a friendly minion dies. This seems like a very potentially potent card to me. Obviously, it goes into those sort of same combo style archetypes, I feel like, with the Illidari. My guess, and I can't necessarily tell just by reading it here, is that this only upgrades when this is in your hand. Usually, the cards that work otherwise will tell you. Say this game. This, I assume, is only upgrades while it's in your hand, which kind of puts it into a weird situation where it's a card that is a finisher that you kind of want to have in your hand in the early to mid game. When you just draw this in the late game, it's pretty terrible, right? Usually when you draw like a big expensive card and you're just like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. This is, going to win me the game. This is literally going to summon two wisps if you play it on 9 mana when you just top decked it. So that, I think, kind of causes some sort of tension with this card and, how you actually want to play it in certain decks and how powerful it's likely to be. So I do feel like this is a card that in those sort of soul magic decks may see some amount of play as just like, okay, well, I have some sort of big finisher. But the fact that there's so much pressure on it in terms of being in your hand when you have these combos going off, and especially like compare this with like Feast of Souls, right? Feast of Souls you play at the end of like effectively a send your minions to die sacrifice type chain. And then if you draw Nephron off of that, you don't get credit for the Nephron off of the minions that died to power up your Feast of Souls. That, I think, is one of the biggest things that's going to make this card less effective than it may seem on the surface. And it's also important to note that this, it's a 9 mana thing that yes, it can put a ton of stats into play, but a lot of the stats you put into play are just gonna, it's just like, okay, here's a bunch of stats. Like, let's say this summons 2 other 8/8s, right? You paid 9 mana, you got 3 8/8s. It's obviously super powerful, right? But at the same time, against like a control deck that can clear the board, freeze the board, Zephyrus for, Twisting Nether or whatever, like, they're gonna have an answer to that at that point in the game when you've already built up so much to it. So I feel like this card is, going to be more of kind of a flashy meme type card than a core card for those Illidari rush decks, simply because of the amount of work that it takes to actually get it to be good, and the fact that it's a bad top deck, and the ease with which most of the decks where you're looking for that sort of effect can deal with it. I feel like you're much more likely to be winning the game with blowing your opponent up with Wrathskill Naga than just playing a bunch of dirtily stats with a Nephron Thomas. All right. Where were we? Nope. I'm opening from the wrong window. Next up, we have Hulking Overfiend, aka Bigger Head, Better Head. I don't know. Basically, it's like Batterhead, the neutral minion. That's 3/12. Whatever kills a minion, can attack right again. This is a 5/10, which can kill a lot more things and then attack again. So this is clearly a very powerful effect. And one of the things I think is actually pretty good about this, obviously, is if you are playing one of the sort of big demon style strategies, having a big minion that can come down and immediately impact the board is really important. And combined with, say, the Fel Screamer, you can get this down as early as turn 6 or 5 with the coin and kill off a bunch of small opposing minions. That's a really big deal. So I actually think that you look at this and you're like, oh, well, Batterhead only really ever saw play in, like, Res Priest, right? And this isn't, like, strictly better than Batterhead because it has less health, but the 5 attack means it kills more things when it runs into them, and the fact that it is in a class that, and likely to be in an archetype, where you really want that board clear, unlike, Batterhead wasn't in a class, it was a neutral card, but like the impact of this when it comes down, its ability to actually clear things off, I think is going to be much higher, especially in combination with Raging Fel Screamer, than Batterhead ever had. And I think that this is one of those sort of big demons that's likely to actually be pretty impactful in the big demon hunter decks. Next up, we have Soul Split. 4-cost card. Choose a friendly demon, summon a copy of it. This is possibly a card that could be attractive in those big demon decks. The problem with this is that you need to have the big thing in play and then play this. Obviously, this can be very powerful with, say, the card we just talked about, the Hulking Overfiend. If you do, Raging Fel Screamer that out, and on 10 mana, you can play one of those and then Soul Split it and smash your opponent's stuff up. But my guess is that this card is just unlikely to be that good. It's basically a limited Molten Reflection, and Molten Reflection mostly saw play as a sort of combo card rather than as like a board presence value style card. This, I don't know of any combinations that could possibly exist that are extremely powerful to have like a bunch of extra demons. But my gut feeling and sort of instinct is that having to have a big thing in play to get value off the Soul Split already is going to make this too difficult to use effectively. Where are we? Next up, we have Consume Magic. 1-cost, silence an enemy minion with Outcast, draw a card. I think this card is very good. 1-cost silence may not necessarily seem great, but just the Outcast on it makes it, I think, go from being a at best fringe situational card to a card that feels like you want to put it into a lot of decks. Having access to silence when you need it is a very valuable thing, and the problem with having effects that silence in your deck is very often that when you don't run into something that you want to silence, well, your silence effect ends up being pretty much worthless, right? It just rots in your hand. Either that, or you just play out like an inefficient body on something like Spellbreaker, which got Hall of Famed in part because it was such an efficient thing to do, even when it wasn't good. It wasn't like it was great, but it was good enough. This, I think, is fantastic in a deck that has the appropriate construction to be able to manipulate Outcast well, which is to say that I think this is going to be a really good card in an aggressive or mid-rangey style Demon Hunter deck, and not a card that you want to put into your control decks, because those decks have more both situational cards and more expensive cards, so that makes it a lot harder to ensure that you can get your Outcast cards to the appropriate place in the hand. This specifically allows you to effectively just cycle through it if you don't need it. And obviously the fact that it costs 1 means that if you just draw it off the top of your deck and there's no good target and you're like, okay, I need something else, you can just spend the 1 mana and draw a new card, as long as there's an enemy minion in play. And that's a really big deal. And I think will make this a very popular card. But again, very important to keep in mind the construction of your deck and how well it supports the Outcast mechanic. It's very easy to build a deck that has a bunch of stuff like pick Commander and Hulking Overfiend, and then be like, oh, I have all these Outcast cards that suck because they're just like glutted between these expensive spells. Don't do that if you're playing a bunch of Outcast cards. But do play this if you're playing a deck that can support it well by moving the cards around your hand and playing them effectively, because I think this card is absolutely great. Next up, we have Wrath Spike Brute. 5-cost, 2/6 taunt. After this is attacked, deal 1 to all enemies. This card is very good, I think. Granted, I think it's a metagame card, a situational card. When I first looked at this, I was like, oh, this is only good against, like, you know, swarm decks or whatever. But it's after it's attacked, period, deal 1 to all enemies. So if your opponent has, like, 3/3/3s, they attack with one, they attack with another. Both those are dead, and the other one has 1 health left, right? If your opponent has a board full of 2/2s, they played, like, the Forest State or whatever, they attack into this twice, and all their stuff is dead. I think this is just a very powerful card in a metagame that has a lot of decks that are looking to swarm the board. Obviously, it's less powerful against other stuff, but even against a deck full of 3/3s, right? If your opponent has 3/3s, they attack into this and die, and that, you know, is obviously, you could just be a 3/6 and be the same way, but it also can, like, decimate the rest of their board in the process, and it damages the opponent. It's not all enemy minions, it's the opponent as well. So it also gets, like, little bits of chip damage in here and there to whittle your opponent down if you're playing a mid-range or aggressive strategy. So definitely worth keeping in mind in any metagame that has a lot of small minions especially. Next up, we have Blur. 0-cost spell. Your hero can't take damage this turn. I feel like this is unlikely to be a very good card. It does cost 0, so maybe you play this in, like, some form of Auctioneer Twin Slice deck, because it is a 0-cost spell and you can use it to cycle through your deck and stuff. But overall, I feel like, you know, this is unlikely to be good enough to justify just having a slot in your deck. Maybe if you're playing, you know, a Demon Hunter deck with, like, Warglaives of Azeroth, and, you know, you just want to, like, attack into all your opponent's minions and kill them, this can be an effective way against, like, aggressive decks where you can just clear their entire board and not worry about taking damage. But my guess is that overall this is unlikely to see very much play. Maybe you play this in, like, a deck with, like, Kael'thas, right? And you play Warglaives, and you play the Inner Demon, and you're like, okay, I'm going to Blur, Inner Demon, kill everything, hit you for a bunch of damage. Maybe, but I think it's unlikely to be a card that shows up outside of very specific combos like that. This is not a card that you just put into your deck because you want to attack into a big thing. That's going to be too situational and generally too bad. So this is, I think, one of the few Demon Hunter cards that I think is kind of, like, on the fringes of playability at all. And will only really see play in a weird combo situation. All right, next up we have Mana Burn. 1-cost spell. Your opponent has 2 fewer mana crystals this turn. This is a very interesting card because it's a very unusual effect for Hearthstone in general. Hearthstone typically has very few cards that let you really mess with your opponent's plan, especially in a generic sense, right? Most of the stuff that we have that can mess with your opponent's plan tends to be something which is very specific, like a Boom Pistol Bully or a Lotheb. This allows you to just cut your opponent off of 2 mana crystals for next turn, period, no matter what they want to do. You know, while this may look like a card that's like, oh wow, you just get to, you know, stop your opponent from playing, you know, their big thing, it costs you a card. That's very, very important to note. This costs you a card. So you're almost never going to want to play this in a deck that doesn't have a way to recoup that card fairly easily. I could see this in that same, like, bunch of cheap spells plus Auctioneer weird stuff, Kael'thas, you know, go crazy. I don't know what that deck looks like with Auctioneer or whatever, but, like, that sort of deck, a Feast of Souls deck, something that actually gives you a way to mitigate the fact that you are getting a very low impact on the actual game with the card and the mana that you're spending. So I think that this card is actually fairly overrated from most of the evaluations that I've seen so far. Because I think a lot of people, they're just like, oh, this is just really powerful. You just cut your opponent from being able to play like a thing next turn. It's like, yes, but like, say you are playing an aggressive deck, right? A lot of times an aggressive deck will generally like have like just enough to get over the line and kill your opponent before their like really big powerful effects come online. And yes, you could say, well, they can't play their big powerful effect because you mana burn them. But if you mana burn them and then they're still not dead and they get to play their big powerful thing, you can very easily just be out of enough action to be able to finish the game because you spent that one card in mana burning them. So I think that this is a card that's like only should see play in very specific decks, and generally, again, decks that have some way of drawing a bunch of extra cards like Feast of Souls or Auctioneer or whatever, in order to recoup the fact that you are burning a card to mana burn your opponent. Next up, we have I-Beam. I-Beam is super good. I don't think I need to tell you it's super good, but I will tell you it's super good. Lifesteal, 3 damage to a minion, can cost 0. This card is super, super powerful in any kind of tempo-based matchup. Obviously, especially with a class that's using its life total as a resource with the hero power. This is just the sort of card that, like, you'll hear people complaining, oh, I played against Demon Hunter to do true I-Beams, and you got to outcast them both. This is that sort of card. This is an absolute staple. This is a card that will swing games, will swing matchups. This is going to be one of the most important cards in any kind of Demon Hunter deck for the rest of the year. This is an initiate card, so it's a Year of the Dragon card. You're gonna get sick of it by the time the end of the Year of the Phoenix comes around. You're gonna be glad the I-Beam is going away because this card is that powerful, gonna be that swingy. It's that good. Play I-Beam. It's awesome. Don't necessarily play I-Beam if you're playing like a heavy control deck, again, because Outcast is part of what makes it powerful. 3 cost, drain your thing for 3 isn't as good, so don't necessarily put this into all of your big control decks. Even though a lifesteal removal effect is good there, it may still be good is the thing. Because if you're playing a controlling deck, getting to outcast this every now and then is obviously bonkers. But even just like kill your guy, gain some life can be powerful enough. So just overall, this card is great, and we're gonna see a lot of it. Next up, we have Illidari Fellblade. I feel like this is another one of those cards people will complain about because the impact when this gets outcast is so high. It's a 5/3 rush for 4. I do think that this is likely to see like a reasonable amount of play in mid-range and aggressive versions of Demon Hunter because it hits hard once it's actually cleared off your opposing minion, and being able to kill like an opposing taunt with this is a really, really big deal. But yeah, obviously this is dramatically more powerful when it's outcast. When it's not outcast, this is pretty bad. This is just 5/3 rush for 4, which is just not a very good card. It's not terrible either. It's not like disastrous if you don't outcast this. But obviously the gap between outcasting and not is pretty huge. So again, this is the sort of card that you want to play in a deck that can manipulate its hand pretty well, has mostly cheap stuff. This is probably among the more expensive cards you want to play in those decks. Because you want to be able to move everything else around to outcast things effectively. I do see this as a way for an aggressive deck to get through taunts very effectively, as well as a way for a mid-range deck to both pressure, get through taunts from control decks, as well as take down the early game minions from aggressive decks to get to a sort of mid-range later power turns. Next up, we have Umberwing. It's a 2-cost 1/2 weapon with Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 Fellwings. I think this is one of the best Demon Hunter cards. That may seem weird to say about a 2-cost weapon, but that just makes a couple guys. This is basically like mini Muster for Battle. If you remember Muster for Battle was absolutely dominant in a lot of matchups. This is a lot like Muster for Battle in a class that cares more about attacking, and also has great ways to use the bodies for stuff like Feast of Souls, etc. I just think this card is fantastic. You can curve this into the Seder Overseer and have tremendous board presence and pressure as early as turn 3. The fact that it's a cheap weapon allows you to easily use your various attack trigger things early in the game without having to spend mana. In addition to just creating a powerful board right away, the fact that it's a 1 power weapon isn't that big a deal in terms of like it having a weak impact because your hero power buffs it automatically. You can use Twin Slice along with it to be able to kill like up to like 3 health things in the early turns of the game and protect those 1/1s and just get chip damage in with those. This card is just great, and I expect to see it in a lot of Demon Hunter decks. Next up, we have Altruist the Outcast, a 3-cost 3/2. After you play the left or rightmost card in your hand, deal 1 damage to all enemies. This feels like a card that wants to be more in like mid-range, like aggro mid-range Demon Hunter than anything else. Again, this wants to be. I feel like this wants to be in a deck that is able to obviously trigger it a lot easily because it has cheap cards. But generally, like if all the things I said about Outcast stuff, well, this is obviously an Outcast themed card. It's literally the Outcast. But I don't feel like this is like an auto include. I think this is more of a metagame inclusion. You don't really want this against like a control deck. It's pretty weak. Obviously, a 3/2 body for 3 is just like not a lot of pressure. But if you're playing against any kind of board-based deck, this can really pick them apart. If you play this and play play this into I-Beam, into something else, and suddenly you've like killed a 5 health thing and dealt 2 to the rest of their board, and that's like extremely powerful. It also damages the opponent, gets all enemies, so that's a really big deal as well. But again, I feel like this is very much a contextual card. I feel like just given the how good it is against Umberwing, maybe you just want to play it in all your Demon Hunter decks because everyone's going to be playing Demon Hunter with Umberwing once it comes out. But yeah, this doesn't stand out to me to be like incredible. It feels very contextual in terms of finding the right metagame for it, rather than just kind of putting it into all your decks. And even then, it specifically wants to go in a particular type of Demon Hunter deck that can reliably trigger its ability. Oops. I was again changing the wrong image. Where are we now? Have to scroll pretty far down. The face plays taunt. We still go face. Kayn Sun Fury. Charge cards in 2020. What is this world we're living in? Yeah, this card is very, very powerful, I think. 4-cost, 3/5 charge. Obviously, it's both actually because of its combination of stats, good as a board control card. One of the weird things we've seen in Hearthstone is how many aggressive decks use cheap taunts to defend their aggressive minions. And the fact that this can just attack past a Voidwalker and kill a Flame Imp makes this a fantastic card. Even against like Zoo, right? Because it eats that and then still has health to survive, additional attacks. This card is obviously just very good. It's a card that's going to piss a lot of people off for a very long time because they can be like, oh god, I had this wall of taunts and then my opponent just caned and killed me. I really do wish that the voice line for this was actually just, if the face plays taunt, we still go face. And I think that every time someone plays this, they should be legally required to pull up the Face Hunter song by Carl the Dog and play that line. Or at least, I'm going to get a soundboard clip of that just to be able to play every single time I play Kayn Sun Fury, because that is what this is for. Next up, we have Nether Walker, 2-cost 2/2, Battlecry, discover a demon. This card is even fine, right? It depends somewhat on what sort of demon synergies. I don't really think there's that many demon synergies that exist in Demon Hunter, but if you're looking to just have decent early minions that you don't run out of action when you're playing them, this is a totally fine thing. This is, I think, probably among the weaker cards in Demon Hunter that we've seen so far. But even then, again, I don't think there's that many like really weak cards in Demon Hunter, simply because they don't have as many of them as other classes. So I don't expect this to see a ton of play. But compare this to like Menacing Nimbus, right? Like Menacing Nimbus wasn't even discovered; just get a random elemental. Granted, there were a lot more synergies around Menacing Nimbus, and that was the reason that you'd play something like Menacing Nimbus in a deck. You didn't just play Menacing Nimbus in decks randomly. But yeah, I think this is just like potentially a filler card if you're looking for curve and you care about the value generated by the Discover effect. But I don't think this is a card that I'm excited to play. It's just going to be something that like fills a slot if it's there. Next up, we have Ash Tongue Battlelord. It's a 4-cost, 3/5 taunt lifesteal. This card is, I just think, solid, right? I mean, Senjin hasn't really seen consistent play, or really any play, in constructed level for a while. But adding lifesteal to that is a really big deal. This is an extremely powerful card against any kind of aggressive deck. And even more powerful when you think about the fact that Demon Hunter just uses its face, hits those minions. Yeah, I just think this is a super, super solid card. Not going to be a card that sees like, a crazy amount of play. Like, and I don't think this is an example of power creep, right? A lot of people, anytime they see a card that is strictly better than another card, they're like, this is power creep. No, power creep, A, isn't when a class card is better than a neutral card. Class cards should be better than neutral cards. And B, class cards that don't see constructed play, making cards better than them does not mean that you're power creeping over that, because they don't see constructed play anyway, and that's not increasing the overall power level of the game. But overall, I think this is a card that we'll see play in metagames where there are a significant number of aggressive decks where the Demon Hunters, are looking to take damage early, use their face to kill those things, and then want a way to recoup some of that life and defend themselves later. I think this is just like not a crazy powerful card. And obviously, when you see a card that's people are like, oh, this is power creep. It's like, well, the card's not actually that good. It's like, well, there's definitely room to make cards more powerful without it being power creep. So yeah, I think this card's just generally solid. We'll see play specifically in certain metagames where you're looking for ways to defend yourself against aggression. Next up, we have Metamorphosis. This is a 5-cost legendary spell, which I do want to say it's kind of interesting that there are legendary spells in this set, just kind of quietly. When there were legendary spells in Boomsday, it was like the first time that there were legendary spells was a really big deal. Each class had a legendary spell, and they're all kind of these like big epic sort of things for the most part. And I think that there's space to just make legendary spells without them necessarily being like the hallmark of a set, and we see that here. So I'm happy to see that just generally. This I think is a pretty powerful card. 5-cost, turn your hero power into deal 5. Your hero power still costs 1 mana, right? So this is effectively 6 deal 5, and then you get to deal 5 again for 1 mana on a future turn. So yeah, I think this is a very, very powerful effect. It can be an easy finisher for an aggressive deck. You get to kill your opponent like with effectively a pyroblast worth of burst, but it happens over 2 turns, and you can do it much faster than you can pyroblast someone. You get a lot of aggression in, and then like on turn 6, you're like, okay, Metamorphosis ping you, and then you get to very likely finish them off the next turn. So I think that this is not going to be a staple card. I don't think that, for instance, like a control deck necessarily wants this. Though in the right metagame, I could certainly see that if they are looking for burst damage to be able to finish people off, or if the stats of minions that see a lot of play, if it lines up well against them, it can just be kill 2 minions over the course of 2 turns, and that alone can be pretty powerful. So yeah, I think this is a very solid card that will see a pretty significant amount of play. Where I wish I should have divided these into folders. They're all divided by class, but I have to scroll down. I need to divide them into folders myself. Maybe I'll do that with the rest of them after we finish Demon Hunter. All right. Next up, we have Warglaives of Azeroth, 5-cost, 3/4, After attacking a minion, your hero may attack again. This card's pretty sweet, right? Like, in particular, again, the fact that Demon Hunter has significant ways to buff their attack, using this with Twin Slice, with your hero power, with Chaos Strike, allows you to possibly just chop down, both like chop down a taunt, hit your opponent in the face, or like chop down 2 minions. I think a big part of it is specifically kill the taunt, attack your opponent in the face. That's one of the things that I think is most likely to happen with warglaives. Because attacking too many minions with this is not really that exciting. You just take tons of damage. You could use it with Blur, as I was talking about earlier, and kill an entire opposing board full of stuff. That was one of the sort of corner cases. I was like, okay, if there's a metagame where you really want to warglaives into a board full of like 3/3s to effectively gain 12 with it or whatever. But again, that's a very specific case that you need to have both cards come up and the board state come up. And they don't do anything together proactively. It's just basically reactively. So again, don't think Blur is good. Do think warglaives are good though. And yeah, I think this is a great, especially like mid-range card, right? Because in a mid-range deck, you are often taking the role of control against aggression and against aggro against control. And this is a card that against an aggressive deck, you can use to kill a bunch of minions in a single turn and really turn the tide back to you. And against a control deck, you can use, again, to kill their taunt and hit them in the face, and it generates a lot of damage for a single card and for only 5 mana, and that really adds up in those sort of matchups. So that's where I think this card rather, is mostly going to shine in that kind of deck. Next up, we have Crimson Sigil Runner. 2-cost, 2/1, or sorry, it's a 2-cost. That's not what I meant at all. Next up, we have Crimson Sigil Runner, a 1-cost 2/1 with Outcast Draw card. This is an interesting card because obviously, like a 1-cost 2/1. If you're playing a deck that wants an early minion, this can be a good way to get that. And also, like in the mid to late stage of the game, it's like, okay, I just get to cycle it, right? It's effectively a Novice Engineer. When you draw it off the top of your deck. The guy looks kind of goofy. He's just like, ooh, ooh, ooh. I can't do his pose because my arm gets cut off. But he runs weirdly with those daggers in each hand. I don't know, but overall, I think this card is just very, very solid, right? It's a couple of things. One, again, if you want a cheap minion, you are willing to play usually even a like non-optimal cheap minion in the early stage of the game, and you often want a lot of them, right? If you're playing an aggressive deck, having anything that cycles and draws you an extra card is really valuable. It's one of the reasons that Zoo is one of the aggressive archetypes in Hearthstone that's always around, because life tap is so good at continuing your flow of resources. So Crimson Sigil Runner, effectively, if this was just 1-cost 2 and draw a card, it'd be unbelievably powerful, right? And it is often 1-cost 2 draw a card, because if you're playing an aggressive deck with a bunch of cheap things, you're very likely to be able to outcast it. So I think this card is just very, very solid, and is likely to show up in pretty much every aggressive Demon Hunter deck. Next up, we have Pit Commander, which is one of my favorite Demon Hunter cards. 9-cost 7/9 Taunt. The end of your turn, summon a demon from your deck. I love just big dude decks. I love decks that win in big dramatic fashion by generating huge boards, and this is great at that. This is obviously a card that works very well with the Raging Fel Screamer to get it out early to start summoning big demons from your deck. If you only have big demons in your deck, this is obviously only going to summon other big demons from your deck. And I like that this is both a big powerful thing on its own that also rewards you for building your deck in a particular way. Overall, I think this card is very likely to be pretty powerful because it does have such a huge swing, especially if you're able to play it early. Obviously, it's vulnerable to mass removal, but if your deck is like Pit Commanders, hulking Overfiends, the demons that AoE your opponent's board, I think that you can do a lot worse. And I think that there's a lot of interesting deck building decisions as to how you actually build your deck with this. Like, are you trying to absolutely maximize getting only really, really big demons, and you're only playing like sevens, eights, nines, or whatever, or you're like, okay, I'm going to play some 5-drops and 6-drops as well, and trying to figure that out. So I think it's a very, very interesting deck building challenge to try to figure out how best to utilize Pit Commander. Obviously, this is a pretty narrow card. You really only want to play this in like a controlling big demon deck, but I feel like this is one of the best big demons that exists for that deck, and I expect it to be really an all-star in that archetype. There's so many Demon Hunter cards. There's just so many. Next up, we have Spectral Sight. 2-cost card, draw a card. Outcast, draw another. I'm going to go with my usual Outcast spiel. I think this is a card that is only really going to be effective if you are playing a deck that can use the Outcast effectively. So you want to have a bunch of cheap things so you can move Spectral Sight around in your hand. Obviously, a deck that's full of cheap things will often want to draw extra cards, right? So having 2-cost, draw 2 in your deck, I think is very, very powerful for that kind of deck. But if you're like playing a deck that's very aggressive, I don't necessarily know you want to play this, even if it is like 2-cost, draw 2, because a lot of times you just want to be able to do things with the cards in your hand and spend your mana to actually generate board presence. And if too many of the cards in your deck are things like this, or the Silence Outcast card, you can end up with a hand you can't really play effectively to be proactive. But I do think that this is just generally a solid card. And if you are playing, I think like more of like a not all out aggression, but kind of like mid-rangey Outcast deck, I feel like that's where this card will shine. Next up, we have Priestess of Fury. 7-cost, 6/7. The end of your turn deals 6 damage, randomly split among all enemies. This is another big demon. And this, is specifically all enemies. This is, obviously very good if your opponent has a bunch of small tokens. You just sort of wipe out all their stuff. And can also just be on an empty board, fireball your opponent, hit them for 7. Very powerful card to ramp into with Raging Fel Screamer. You can play that in turn 4, play this in turn 5, and end up blowing up a bunch of your opponent's stuff. Works very well with the stuff like Twin Slice. You can pick apart little bits of your opponent's board to make this more likely to actually kill your opponent's things. I do think that obviously the fact that this is a random effect is going to mean that there's going to be a lot of situations where you're like, oh god, I need to hit this. But I feel like this sort of randomness, where especially with Demon Hunter and your ability to attack into stuff regularly, you can do a lot of work to try and maximize the odds of Priestess of Fury doing the sort of thing that you want to do by setting the health of their various minions to the appropriate amounts that give you the best chance of the thing you need to happening. So I think this card is powerful, and I think this is another one of those cards that will go into the big demon decks, and could even see this being sort of a curve topper for like a mid-range type deck that can help finish the opponent off or help control the board. Next up, we have Furious Felfin, who is a Murloc Demon Hunter. A 2-cost, 3/2 Battlecry. If your hero attack this turn, gain +1 attack and rush. This is not quite like the Underbelly Fence in terms of giving you like a good value trading type tool for your trigger, but obviously very easy to enable this. As long as you hero power on turn 3, you can play this and hit something for 4. This trades up extremely well, and I think that 4 health as a breakpoint, because of Furious Felfin, even 5 health because you can attack into something and then hit it, is likely to be a pretty big deal in matchups against Demon Hunter. But yeah, I think this card is very, very powerful and very, very adorable, and I expect it to see lots of play, and I expect lots of people to go like or whatever that thing he says in the trailer, which is the, I guess, Murloc language version of "You are not prepared." Next up, we have Fel Summoner, a 6-cost 8/3 with Death Rattle. Summon a random demon from your hand. 8 is a lot of attack, but 3 is not very much health. Obviously, on a death rattle like this, you're like, okay, let it die. If it dies, it dies, and you end up summoning some big demon from your hand. This feels like it's okay for some of these big demon decks. Like the fact that this dies to Chaos Nova, and you could play this, like hit your opponent in the face, Chaos Nova, get a big thing down in the same turn. I think is actually a pretty interesting way to possibly use this. But this does feel like one of the weaker of the cards. It has no defensive ability at 6 mana. Obviously, Death Rattle put a Pit Commander into play is a pretty powerful defensive ability, but your opponent can just either silence it or just ignore it because you're not doing anything that actually impacts the board immediately. If you somehow like give this Rush, this could be pretty scary, but Demon Hunters can't use lackeys at least, so they can't get Goblin Lackey to double pay this into something. So overall, I think this is like not the best of cards that we've seen in Demon Hunter, and I'm okay with that because this is the sort of thing that gets a giant thing down quickly. And as much as I like that, I don't think we need to have tons of that around. Next up, we have Immolation Aura. 2-cost, deal 1 to all minions twice. There's a lot of cards in Demon Hunter that are good against small things. Demon Hunters are apparently very good at killing swarms of small minions. This is interesting because you can use this to either clear Divine Shields and then kill like Argent Squires, I guess. Just AoEs for 2. Obviously, it can kill your like own things as well. Important to note. But can kill like death rattles off of things. Overall, just I don't think that this feels like it is great. If you're playing like a control deck in a world of small minions, it's just 2-cost deal 2 to everything, which alone is actually pretty powerful. Again, crucially important, the fact that you have a hero power to help finish things off that only costs 1 makes any kind of damage-based removal a lot more reliable to kill larger minions than in a lot of other classes. So it's not like Defile. It's because obviously it keeps ticking if you're playing Defile. But it is better against just a board of 2 health minions than a Defile would be. Overall, I think this card is a metagame contingent card. If there are a lot of aggressive decks and you are playing one of those controlling big demon type decks, I definitely see putting this in your deck to help clear off the board early, as well as to help finish off things later on. Next up, we have Skull of Gul'dan, which is, I think, one of the more powerful cards in Demon Hunter. Draw 3 cards, Outcast, reduce their cost by 3. As I was saying before, I think that Outcast feels like it's a mechanic that's very good in like mid-rangey style decks because you want to have enough cheap things that you can manipulate the position of cards in your hand. And if you're playing a deck that has a lot of kind of like mid-cost cards, being able to Skull of Gul'dan, draw a bunch of things that are reduced to like 1 or 0, they can be very, very, very powerful. So this is, I think, a super, super powerful card. It's weird to me this isn't their legendary spell because there's multiple Skulls of Gul'dan, I guess. Like, you'd think you could metamorphosize multiple times, but can you actually get multiple Skulls of Gul'dan? I don't know. But yeah, I think this card is super good, and I think that building your deck to maximize Outcast is going to have a lot to do with building your deck to maximize Skull of Gul'dan, because it's going to be a serious engine card in getting those decks to work. So yeah, this card is I think super, super good, and I think that we're going to have a lot of people complaining about what cards their opponent drew off of Skull of Gul'dan and got cost reduced in the future. Next up, we have Coil Fang Warlord. 8-cost 9/5 rush. With Death Rattle, summon a 5/9 Warlord with Taunt. This is a really impactful high-cost card. Being able to just smash something down and then also get a big Taunt minion feels extremely powerful. It is sort of weird that this is a big minion that's actually actively very bad against a bunch of small minions. Because if you're paying 9 for a rush minion that just like kills a small minion and you can't actually get it killed, it's actually pretty bad, right? But in like a mid-range matchup where this attacks into a big thing and then gives you a big taunt, this card feels extremely powerful. So I feel like this is a very like metagame dependent card. But like in a world where we live right now, where there's a bunch of like Alexstrasza's, right? You're putting like Alexstrasza's into something. You're like, okay, Coilfang Warlord, kill your Alexstrasza, get a 5/9 taunt minion. That's at least like a pretty good answer to what is one of currently the really powerful tempo plays in Standard. This gives you, at least you answer that and get some additional defense to answer one of the other 0-cost minions. So I feel like this is a metagame dependent card. If there are a lot of like big things, this is good into trading into. In the sort of like mid-range / control style matchups, this feels like it'd be very powerful. But against aggressive decks, this card is absolute trash. And we have finally reached the last card in the Demon Hunter portion of this review. We had all the classic cards, all the initiate cards, and all the Ashes of Outland cards. And what a card to end on for Demon Hunter. It is Imprisoned Antian. A 5-cost 10/6 demon with Dormant. When it wakes up, deal 10 damage randomly split among all enemies. This card is very, very, very powerful in a lot of matchups, right? Against like a control deck, if you get this into play and they like only have reactive cards in the hand, it just like wakes up and deals 10 to them, which is crazy. If they're playing a like fast deck, well, there's a very good chance that you spent 5 mana playing this and then they killed you. But if they didn't kill you, this blows up their board and then gives you a 10/6 in play. I feel like this is a card that is extremely contingent on matchups because, again, if you're playing as aggressive decks and this is in your deck, you'd better have a lot of really good ways to keep yourself alive, because drawing a card that you have to spend 5 mana on does nothing for 2 turns, you're going to die. But in the right matchups, this is a 10 power minion that does 10 to your opponent's face for 5 mana, and that's a really, really big deal. So yeah, I think this is a very interesting card too, in terms of like how you play around it in a lot of matchups. Like, what do you want to do? You want to load up a bunch of power on a bunch of health on the board to try to absorb as much as possible, and you see it coming, right? Like the fact that this is dormant for 2 turns means that you get multiple opportunities to like plan ahead to figure out how best to absorb it. Whether you're just going to spend those 2 turns killing your opponent, or you're like, okay, I need to create a board where I can absorb that damage and then have a way to actually deal with the Antian afterwards. So I think this is a very interesting card, and I actually like this kind of card being pretty powerful because I think it informs both gameplay and deck building. Because if this is a popular card and you're playing like a mage control deck with no minions, you're like, okay, I got to do something different because this thing keeps killing me. So I think that the way in which you both, again, play the games and construct your decks is going to have to think about this card for a while, because I think this card is quite powerful. All right. That's Demon Hunter. We did it.